Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, OpenBSD launches LibreSSL, but what challenges do they face and how much progress have they made? We'll report. Then Apple faces their own woes and Heartbleed is used to bypass two-factor authentication. Then it's a great big batch of your questions, our answers, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 160 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We record this episode live on April 24th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, Ting, DigitalOcean, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, that's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody.
Hey, Alan. Good to have you in studio still.
Data center.
Yeah, not studio. We're in a data center. Absolutely. We're just taking advantage of the fact that Alan was here for Linux Fest Northwest, and we said we have to do 160 in studio.
Yep.
So we're doing, we did 159 last week, and then we're doing 160 right now.
Yep.
Sorry if you tried to tune in live, but don't worry. We got a great show for you this week. We've been saving some of our Heartbleed follow-up for this episode because things have gotten really interesting, and maybe one of the most interesting turns in this most recent story is the whole LibreSSL chapter.
Yes. So the folks, the team behind OpenBSD has formalized their fork of OpenSSL and called it LibreSSL. The main goal is to update the coding standards to use more modern and safer C programming practices, fixing memory allocation and all the ways that everything is done. But the impetus to actually start doing this was in fact not Heartbleed. They were considering this before Heartbleed.
Oh, really?
When they found those mitigation countermeasures and just the fact that in general, the way the code is makes it really hard to audit.
Right. This is already on the OpenBSD's radar.
Yeah. So much of the way OpenSSL is constructed makes it hard to audit with tools like Covariant or Valgrind because of the custom memory allocators and basically wrapping all the functionality that normally comes out of the OS and not using it directly. And then because of the lack of a consistent style convention or variable naming and all that, it was really hard to audit the code by hand as well. And they're like, well, there's only one way to fix this, and that's to just fork it and giant white space patches, ripping out all the stuff we don't need, like support for Windows, and changing
ripping out support for Windows, huh?
Yep.
Now, what I think is kind of interesting about the whole LibreSSL thing is the site they announced it on has got my attention. It's written in Comic Sans for one.
And they had a Blink tag on there, but then realized that Blink only works in like links. So that someone's actually gone back now and written some CSS that actually turns the Blink into a CSS animation.
There it is.
Yeah, so you actually get the Blink tag in there now.
Oh, good. And this...
Because most people didn't know it because browsers don't actually respect the Blink HTML tag.
Because it's obnoxious.
From how long ago? And,
beginning.
Yeah. And... So people didn't really get the joke at first, but now that it's a CSS animation, you see it.
And what's great is like they're like, all right, so you don't like the Comic Sans? Yeah. Fine, donate.
Yeah,
and that's a clever way to get some money.
And so we don't want help with a better website.
Right. Yeah. And right now, LibreSSL only works for OpenBSD, right?
Right. They mostly just took OpenSSL and started ripping stuff out and cleaning up. They're nowhere near to the point where they can start worrying about making it work anywhere.
So is this really just because OpenSSL, in their view, is beyond repair, just too many bugs?
Well, it's that, the white space patches to make the code actually readable so people can start auditing it, which wouldn't have been accepted upstream because they would have basically touched every line and it would just be impossible, like the number of code conflicts you end up with, or just auditing the code is pretty hard. Like when you have a change, you have to make sure that the only thing they're changing in a white space patch is white space.
Right.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be, if someone's submitting a 1,000,000-line patch to clean up the white space, how do you know they didn't slip a bug in there on purpose to exploit it?
And when you're dealing with something like OpenSSL, that's a real consideration.
Exactly. And so they've had to come up with ways to do that using like TR and MD5 to make sure, all right, I can prove that this patch only changed white space and nothing else.
Gotcha. So where are we at now?
So they're still hacking away at quite a pace. They've also removed about 90,000 lines from OpenSSL that were part of the for FIPS certification to be used by the government. And that code's been in there and not maintained for the last 20 years. And it's just a huge bunch of code that shouldn't be in there still. And there was a lot of other code in there where, OpenSSL said, we're going to remove this by this date. And then that was 2 years ago and it's still there. And just nobody was interested in going and digging and doing the cleanup. Mm-hmm. Right? It's scut work and nobody wants to do it. But the OpenBSD guys decided it needs to be done, so we might as well get started.
Gotcha.
And they also found that the OpenSSL bug tracker had bugs that have been open for 4 years and never got a response.
Ouch.
And they're like, well, that one actually needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And then, they fix it and send a patch and it just kind of sat there or whatever. So Bob Beck, who's one of the leaders of the OpenBSD project, he works at the University of Alberta.
Yeah.
And most of the actual crypto code in OpenSSL is actually very good, right? It was written by cryptographers and it's fine. Problem is that a lot of the plumbing, the stuff that actually deals with like putting the packets on the network after the fact and, copying bits of memory around.
Or, that's a big one.
Yeah. Or the code that actually takes care of getting the randomness to seed the random number generator when you're creating the stuff. It's all that stuff that needs to work. And he also said that so far they've been able to maintain API compliance. So all the changes they've made so far, the applications that were designed to work with OpenSSL still work perfectly fine.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's
so they're mostly
you
just
think
changing.
That'll stick?
It's their goal for most of it. Some of the stuff they're going to deprecate the older APIs and maybe come up with some better ones.
Yeah.
But for now, the general idea is that this would be a drop-in replacement for OpenSSL rather than needing something separate. Like I think GNU TLS, you have to compile your program to use it. It's not like you can just switch from OpenSSL to it.
So last week, we talked about the Core Infrastructure Foundation and how they were going to come in and help fund OpenSSL development.
Yeah.
So now you've got a camp forming behind OpenSSL to make it better, and now you've also got a camp saying something new, we got to start over, LibreSSL, let's fork it.
They're not starting over.
Right. But they're saying we're going to...
Which might have actually been the best thing to do, but it would have taken so long to get there
So with this Core Infrastructure Foundation, though, do you think this LibreSSL project is sort of dead in the water as far as its reach is going to be?
Well, so far, LibreSSL has actually fixed bugs, and the Core Infrastructure project hasn't done anything yet.
That's true. And is the OpenBSD Foundation prepared to handle something like this?
It depends. The OpenBSD Foundation may be able to do more with less money.
They definitely got some smart folks working for them.
Yeah, but it may make sense for the Core Infrastructure project to just be like, we want there to be more than one solution for SSL.
That's true. They could.
Let's do a fellowship for each of the two projects.
Yeah.
And, the OpenBSD people like that idea. Like, they make OpenSSH.
Yep.
And they like it, but they're like, the fact that 98% of the internet uses that is bad.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There should be another solution, and half the people should be using it.
All our eggs are in one basket right now in that regard. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, it'll be interesting to see. But the OpenBSD Foundation is soliciting donations to continue the work on LibreSSL and to develop a portable version so that it would be usable on Linux and FreeBSD and so on.
That's depending on funding.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So they're just doing it for themselves, and if they get money, first thing they're going to do is get rid of the Comic Sans. Second thing they're going to do is make Linux ports.
Yeah.
and how hard is it to move something like this? Just I know it's off the top of your head, but
to move it like that different. There's a couple of specific things on OpenBSD, like their dev random has specific properties that means they don't ever have to deal with like making sure that what they're getting is good.
Is it truly random?
Or and like it'll block when it runs out instead of returning less random stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
So that might require some if-defs for Linux or something.
Okay.
But in general, it shouldn't be too bad, I don't think.
Okay. And I would assume pretty easy to move to FreeBSD too then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And if you'd like to donate, you can go to openbsdfoundation.org/donations.html.
Yes. And as you'll notice, with all the OpenBSD websites, they're nice, flat HTML pages.
Yeah. Oh, where did I go? Did I just close it? Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So there it is. Yeah. So, and they're taking PayPal right now. And they've got monthly reoccurrings and one-times and single donations and all that kind of stuff. And, hey, look at that. Bitcoins.
Yep.
So there you go. You can throw some Bitcoins in their face, too, if you want. Very good, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
No, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Or, if they've had like a ridiculous pace so far, it'd be interesting to see how, if they can
that
maintain
simmers
that.
Down
I'm sure it'll simmer down, but
it's hot right now.
Will it keep up and when might we actually start seeing significant changes?
So I'd happen to know that just before you came down to my neck of the woods, you had a hole drilled in the side of your house, right?
Yes.
So you're working on a project.
The fiber installers came by and actually ran the fiber into my house. It's not spliced yet, so there's no like modem on the other end. But we're working towards that, and we'll have the gigabit fiber to my house up fairly soon.
Now, I'm no Sherlock here, but I'm just piecing some evidence together. You got a fiber line coming to your house. Last week, you told us that you just got a new rig from IX Systems, who is our sponsor this week of the TechSNAP program. Go to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Alan, are these two events somehow related?
Yes. It's like the reason why I'm getting some new hardware is because I want to take maximum advantage of that big fiber line.
Yeah.
And one of the main goals of this fiber line is offsite backups for Scale Engine.
Oh, awesome. Right at the house.
We have a huge amount of video, which is really hard to back up.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I know.
And this way, if the machines are in a rack at my house, if something disastrous does happen, A, we can switch and run some of the stuff from my house, but B, the physical machine could be picked up and moved somewhere. Yeah,
and I think what's interesting is, we've talked a lot about IX Systems, and you can find out more by going to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Check out some of their awesome rigs powered by the Intel Xeon processors and their great customer service. But I think it's kind of one of these two things come together because you were having a back and forth with them. Was it about the controller?
Well, there was a couple of different things, but the first part was, because it's just for backups, we're like, we really don't want to spend the same amount of money we did on the primary server.
Yeah.
Right. The primary server is like 34 terabyte SAS drives, like $400 a piece.
I/O is important and the speed of that, but you probably is it more about just getting as many drives as possible?
Yeah, it's just, we need storage and so we're going to use desktop drives. So the problem with desktop drives is the SAS expanders don't play friendly with them and so on. So they were able to come up with a discrete wire solution where we get the 12 drives in the chassis and each one is wired directly to the controller, not through an expander.
Oh,
now
sweet.
The motherboard only comes with a controller that can do 8 drives.
Sure.
So normally you use an expander and connect all 12 to those 2 4 ports.
Sure.
But instead we got a controller card that'll give us the extra 4 ports. And since there was no way that I was going to have 4 more drives in the chassis because it was out of space. They got me a card that has 4 internal port and then a 4-port external. So that if I want to add more drives in the future, I just add a second storage chassis and wire it into the first machine, and I don't have to buy another CPU and then more RAM and so on.
So what was that process like? Would you call them up and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this?
Well, I have this and it's not working. I want to replace it with this and do this. And here's the problem I'm having. What's the best way to solve this?
And they said, Alan, sorry, that's an unsupported configuration. We will not be working with you. Goodbye.
No. Oh. they actually said, well, if we went with, it's like, there's this one chassis that actually will do what you're looking for. And we can get that, even though, it's not an easy one to order from Newegg or something.
Right.
Like some of the chassis are, Supermicro makes chassis. And some of there's some popular ones that are great.
Yeah.
But the one I wanted was not popular. And then one of the other things was like, well, I'm probably going to end up running some beehives or something on this. So let's get a beefy processor. So I was like, I want an E5 2620 V2. It's like, nice. Beefy. Like ridiculous number of cores and low power. And And it's like, but maybe I only need one of those right now. No, I'll use both or whatever. And then it's like, I only have so much money to spend on this.
Yeah, you got a budget.
It's like, I can only put 64 gigs of RAM in it. But I want to use the bigger chips of RAM so that I can add more RAM later without running out of slots.
And you just lay this all out there for them and they build the solution around that.
Yeah, and then they're like, well, you can do that, but when you do, you're not going to get the quad channel support for the RAM because you're not going to have the RAM spread across the processors.
Right.
It's like, so just realize that it's going to impact performance. It's like, yeah, well, when we get to the point where I need the performance, I'll just buy the other half of the RAM and put it in.
That works.
And it'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's like, they gave me this option that a regular configurator would have said, no, you can't do that.
Right.
and or
you were able to go a little outside the box for a setup that works for you.
Yeah.
And really, that's the white glove approach we're talking about all the time. And that's why IX Systems has so many great clients.
The sales guy, not an engineer, the sales guy knew immediately that there was that issue there that I hadn't considered.
Saves you time.
I didn't think of that. It's like, well, if I just get 4 sticks of RAM instead of 8, then it'll save me money.
That is so valuable because when you're busy and you're trying to get something done, because you've allocated a certain amount of time to get this thing figured out, and then you got other stuff you got to do.
Yeah.
And it's like the fact that the sales guy knows about that, that is a huge win. So here's what I want you to do. Go to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP and then check out some of their clients and find out why the U.S. Army WB, the FreeBSD Foundation, lots of companies, Adobe, and VMware, Trend Micro, Virginia Tech, Berkeley, University of Florida, USC, University of Southern California, Colorado State.
Yep.
Craigslist even, which is not a university, but it's a big name. Lots of names, Evernote's on there that use IX Systems. And so do Alan and I. From little rigs to big old rigs, IX Systems can get you covered.
The little router for my fiber, it's a little short depth machine, costs very little money. It costs less than a FreeNAS Mini. And that works. Or you can get a FreeNAS Mini for storage, or you can get a monstrosity like I did that's got 34 terabyte hard drives. Or, I've seen bigger monstrosities. They have pictures on their Facebook of this machine with 400 terabytes.
Yeah, I know.
It comes on a pallet.
Yeah, that's crazy. So go learn more. Go over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. And if you're trying to convince somebody up above you, go grab that ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. It's 11 key traits you just absolutely must demand from your provider. You just plug in your info. They're not going to spam you. They're just going to send you the white paper. Yeah. It's a good read.
And, in the end, you can't tell your boss because Alan said so, unless your boss is really awesome.
Yeah, unless he watches TechSNAP,
so
which he should be.
This guide helps a lot.
Yeah, it helps just move things along.
And explain,
ixsystems.com/TechSNAP.
the difference between IX and, HP or Dell and why IX is better.
There you go.
No matter what you're doing with the servers, even if it's not FreeBSD.
Yeah. So we've been talking about Heartbleed, but and I guess Apple released this statement saying, "Oh, Apple's not affected by the Heartbleed vulnerability." I didn't even know they don't even call it like SSL. They call it like secure channel, which is another way to say SSL, right?
Yeah. Secure connection, I think.
Secure channel connection or something like that. Anyways, they just released a whole series of updates, didn't they? Because they had some big vulnerabilities.
So they had a serious flaw in the way they do SSL on iOS and OS X.
Yeah.
And it could allow an attacker to intercept data on SSL connections. It's called the triple handshake attack, whereas if you're in the man-in-the-middle type situation, you could establish 2 connections that had exactly the same encryption keys. And then using that, you'd set up the handshake, and then you would insert the attacker's data in one connection and then renegotiate so that the connection would be forwarded to each other. So basically, if you're in the man-in-the-middle, you could watch the connection they were legitimately making and then make a similar one with the same encryption keys and then flip the stream so you could take over their connection.
Wow.
Yeah.
Boy, that sounds like something a certain spy agency would just love to take advantage of.
Yeah, although it would give you even more advantage as an attacker because you could hijack a session and stuff like that.
And don't you think it's interesting, too? I mean, not too surprising, this affected OS X and iOS.
It was OS X Lion and Mavericks, as well as iOS 7.1 and earlier.
And it could actually go further back than Lion. I just don't know if Apple discloses any
They don't support anything older.
Yeah.
So
if you're running an older version, you probably are not going to get a patch. Yeah. And it was only recently patched in iOS with iOS 7.1.1.
Right.
So I don't even think they're patching iOS 6 anymore.
I don't think so.
Jeez.
They also have 2 separate vulnerabilities that could allow an attacker to bypass the ASLR, the address space layout randomization.
Right.
One of the key exploit mitigations that are built into the operating system so that if there is some kind of exploit, that the attacker can't do bad things. And also one of the flaws was in the IOKit kernel, and the other was in the OS X kernel.
So, again, both platforms.
The IOKit ASLR one affected iOS 7.1.
A lot of shared code, obviously.
Yep.
Yeah.
Among the other Apple flaws patched were a number of severe vulnerabilities for OS X Mavericks users. The 2 most concerning were a pair of buffer overflows that could lead to remote code execution, which allows somebody to just run whatever they want on your system. One of the bugs was in the font parser, and the second was in the image component. The upshot of the vulnerabilities is that opening a malicious PDF or JPEG could cause arbitrary code execution.
So viewing the picture, viewing the PDF.
Yeah, not very often can a PDF break your system, but if running Apple, just maybe.
You know, so when you look at these support windows, when you look at the fact that iOS 6 is no longer being patched, anything after Lion is no longer being patched, how can you seriously recommend Apple in an enterprise environment?
Yeah. It's a serious issue, especially when it's like something as simple as a JPEG could exploit the system and allow somebody to, they could make a JPEG and embed in that a Java exploit or a rootkit or something.
Yeah.
And you look at the JPEG, which, on most iOS devices probably gets displayed automatically.
Right.
And boom.
What I wasn't clear about, and again, this is another part that bothers me about the way Apple does these disclosures, and what's funny is they've gotten better, but over the years that we've been doing the show, but still, like, they're saying here, they're specifically only talking about with this JPEG or PDF where you could execute code if you load these malicious JPEGs, which is unbelievable to even say that. Yep. It only talks about Mavericks. In all of the Apple documentation, at least the ones I'm seeing linked in this article, they're only talking about Mavericks for this particular vulnerability. But the thing is I don't know.
Is it that Lion isn't vulnerable because it didn't have the change that caused the issue? Or they're just not
talking about it.
Or they're just not going to fix it on Lion.
Right. And I feel like if they did like what Microsoft or like pretty much every other operating system vendor does, where they say affected OSs.
Yep.
Even if it's not being patched anymore, like, hey, Apple, you want to sell some new hardware? Give me documentation that this old stuff's vulnerable so I can tell management I need to buy a replacement.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Microsoft lists on the list of vulnerable OSs anything they don't support anymore.
Oh, maybe not. They just support things
Apple's
for so
not
long.
very clear whether is Mountain Lion still supported or not.
Yeah. How about a lifecycle page? Maybe they have this. See, I haven't dug in specifically on the Apple site, but when they
mention Lion in one announcement and not in the other, it's like
right, exactly.
Some clarity here would be useful.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of I'm left wondering.
That's why when we have CVEs, right? This common vulnerability database thing.
Yes.
They have a format for how you specify which versions are vulnerable.
Yeah.
You can say everything less than 10.9.2.
Yeah.
Or you can say only 10.9.0 through 10.9.2. And that would tell you whether 10.8 is vulnerable or not, even if it's not supported anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that caught my attention about this is here is yet, going back to the first vulnerability you're talking about, here is yet again another SSL vulnerability. This one is the triple handshake vulnerability where you could actually just take over somebody's session. Do you think that we have had years of subversion going to SSL, or do you and so now all of a sudden we're just finding
in this case that vulnerability was only in Apple's implementation. It wasn't in OpenSSL or anybody else.
So that's probably just a mistake.
Yeah.
And everybody's just like doubled down on their auditing, right? That's got to be what's happening here.
I think so.
Yeah. Good. But
yeah, a JPEG that can do arbitrary code execution is still scaring me.
Does it beat a Excel spreadsheet that can have a Flash object embedded in it?
Definitely. Right?
Yeah, it does.
You're not going to open a malicious a malicious Excel document, right? if you get an Excel document from someone you weren't expecting, you're probably not going to open it.
Tell that to TechSNAP.
But a JPEG,
that could just be a web page.
Most devices open those automatically. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm scared.
I don't mean to get like all out of soapbox about it, but it's like if you guys want us to take you seriously in the enterprise space, you got to meet us halfway on some of this stuff, and unfortunately it's improved, but not enough.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
Nope.
All right, well, tell me about something that I think is always improving all the time, and that's one of the things I love about it, and that is DigitalOcean. What is DigitalOcean? Well, it's simple cloud hosting, dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up a cloud server. Users can create a cloud server in 55 seconds. Now, I've got 40 seconds on the record, 43 seconds on the record, and 47 seconds. But I'm waiting for the 40-second screenshot. But people are banging these things out like nuts. And what's awesome about that is you think, oh, that's cool. That's an interesting feature. It actually is a game changer. What DigitalOcean has done is they have taken the most intuitive and simple-to-use interface, and they've laid it on top of a process that I used to charge clients hundreds of dollars an hour to do, to set up servers for them. Like, this is a totally new way to deploy servers, and it is so smooth. And on top of that,
it's like at Skeleton, I had to deploy 32 new servers this week for a big event.
Yes.
And it took me and Price 2 days.
32 servers in 2 days is pretty good, but it's not DigitalOcean speed.
But 32 DigitalOcean things, you could do them concurrently, so it would still only take 55 seconds.
Yeah, what's awesome about that too is for $5, you can get 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, 1 CPU, and a terabyte of transfer. That's your fixed cost. You know it's going to cost you $5 a month to run that. You're not going to get some sort of surprise bill if you use extra CPU or whatever. You know exactly what it's going to be, and $5 is an outrageously great deal. And DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, and Amsterdam. Their interface is simple. They have an intuitive control panel which power users can replicate on a much larger scale with their straightforward API. And so one of the things I've done is I've been taking advantage of their droplet system. So I wanted to have a little test for a couple of days. I took a backup of one of my running droplets, and which is normally on the East Coast. And I thought, we're just doing some file uploads. I just kind of, we're just going to hedge my bets and get the best performance possible. So I took a copy of that droplet and I deployed it in the San Francisco data center, because you get to pick in their really awesome control panel. I deployed it to the San Francisco data center, and for a couple of days, I'm FTPing up and down. And here's what's the best part. If you use the promo code SNAPApril, SNAPApril will get you a $10 credit. You can try out that $5 rig for 2 months for absolutely free. This is nuts. If you don't want to use it at the end, you can turn it off, but you're going to love it. And there's so much you can do when you have your own server, you have root access, up on the cloud, sitting on SSD drives with tier 1 bandwidth. And really, go look at some of their features, because I think you're going to be pretty impressed. One of the things that blew me away about DigitalOcean as an old sysadmin was their HTML5 web console. First of all, the fact that they have a full-on console in HTML5 is mind-blowing. But the other thing that's just amazing about it is you actually get to watch the post process. Like, you see the BIOS come up, you see the whole operating system boot up. It is the real deal, top to bottom. They also have 2-factor authentication, and then one of the other things they do that is really awesome is they're using an open source project that they contribute to called Doku to deploy applications inside Docker instances on a DigitalOcean droplet. So you can say, all right, set up a XYZ server, maybe it's CentOS, maybe it's Ubuntu, whatever, and then just install WordPress for me, or install Ruby on Rails for me. And that's a 1-button installation. That's
nice.
Very nice. And again, it's all about something that you control, something you use, something that's absolutely tier 1 performance, but isn't going to take a ton of time away from you. So you can get right back to what you're doing. That's one of the reasons developers and guys like me who need to do testing love it, because DigitalOcean also offers hourly pricing.
Yes.
Yeah, they have all kinds of great distributions. They just rolled out Ubuntu 14.04 LTS. They've got Fedora. They've got Debian. One-click also for WordPress, LampStack, Ghost, which is pretty awesome. Docker, of course, GitLab, and all kinds of others. And they also have a great community that's growing up around them, creating apps that tie in with DigitalOcean. And one of the things that I really respect about DigitalOcean is very early on, years ago, they took a big risk by betting on SSDs. That was a massive investment for them because the prices were way higher back then. But they knew that the density you get by using SSD and the performance that the customer sees was worth it. And they knew that the secret to making those SSDs worth the investment that they made was pairing that with tier 1 bandwidth and making the control panel as intuitive as possible. So go over to DigitalOcean.com and use that promo code SNAPApril to see what we've been talking about, because my friends, now has never been a better time to create a DigitalOcean droplet. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been using mine for as long as it's really, actually, I found out about DigitalOcean through Michael Dominic from Coder Radio. He uses them for the back-end infrastructure for a lot of his client apps, and he's like, hey, you got to check these guys out. And then after that, one thing led to another. It's like, you guys got to sponsor. The service is awesome. All right, Alan. So we've heard a lot about Heartbleed, but we haven't heard about Heartbleed being used to bypass 2-factor authentication.
Yes.
But it's happened.
Exactly.
So what's up?
So security nightmare sparked by the Heartbleed OpenSSL vulnerability. So Mandiant, who are the security researching company, if you remember, they're the ones that identified APT1, the team of Chinese hackers that broke into the New York Times. One of their clients that they were investigating after Heartbleed, they found that an attacker was able to leverage the Heartbleed vulnerability against a VPN appliance owned by that customer in order to hijack multiple active user sessions and bypass the 2-factor authentication.
No good.
The attack bypassed both the organization's multi-factor authentication and the VPN client software used to validate that the system connecting to the VPN was owned by the organization and that was running specific security software. Right, so they had rules on their VPN that saying you can only connect if you have our security software installed on your system.
Not too
and
uncommon.
making sure that your machine's secure before it even gets on our VPN. But the attacker was able to steal the token that's passed at the very end as proof that you have all this stuff. By stealing that, they were able to connect. So the attacker repeatedly sent the malformed heartbeat requests to the web server that was running the VPN device that had been compiled using a vulnerable version of OpenSSL, and was able to obtain the active session tokens of all the currently authenticated users.
So they read the memory.
Yeah. So they just kept hitting it until they got a bunch of tokens, and then they used those tokens to hijack active sessions.
Wow. This is the first I've heard of something like this.
The attackers successfully hijacked multiple active user sessions and convinced the VPN concatenator that the attacker was actually legitimately authenticated user.
Wow.
After connecting to the VPN, the attacker attempted to move laterally through the network and escalate privilege within the victim organization and do all kinds of damage.
Do a little island hopping.
Yeah.
Why not?
And so you know that the place that this happened to hired Mandiant proactively before it even happened, probably, because I think Mandiant's making that software that verifies the systems they were talking about. And so you know that this was a big place that was targeted by very sophisticated attackers.
Yeah, if you're hiring Mandiant. In fact, Mandiant says their report today is the first publicly known real-world attack on an organization providing remote access via Heartbleed. And recently, I think it was in an offline conversation I had. Somebody was saying to me, I think Heartbleed is way overblown. We haven't seen any big fallout. There's been no real-world examples of it that he knows of. And I think this right here shows you what you can get when you can. When you can read the memory of a remote system. I mean, this is crazy to me. And getting around two-factor.
Getting around two-factor authentication by itself is a huge win. Yeah. Let alone being able to just bypass authentication altogether. And a lot of it comes down to that last in, first out memory allocator, which is exactly why the OpenBSD people wanted to fork OpenSSL before Heartbleed.
Yep.
Because that's just not the right way to do that.
It all comes down to that. I guess some operating systems it might not have mattered if OpenSSL was doing its own memory allocator, right? I mean,
well, they were only doing it because certain operating systems, the memory allocator in the OS was too slow.
Yeah, so, that's I mean,
but then they sacrificed everybody's security.
Yeah, exactly.
For support on those specific operating systems.
Not worth it. Yeah. And so of course, I mean, bad on these guys for not patching their S.
Yep. And if you stay tuned to the roundup, we have a couple of extra stories about where Heartbleed was actually used.
Oh, very good.
So this isn't the only one.
So did you have like a big patching session?
Yes, although I was not actually vulnerable to Heartbleed itself.
Oh.
But there was there's second vulnerability that came out at the same time?
Yes.
As part of the same announcement?
Yes.
Well, it wasn't a huge deal. I patched all my stuff anyway.
I only have a few systems now that I manage directly.
Yep.
And the day it came out, I think the patches were out and I went out and did them. And I got to think, like, why would you not patch at this point? Like, what is your excuse? Is it corporate bureaucracy? Like,
well, it can depend on, in this case, everybody's worried about their web server, and they did that. But what about appliances?
Yeah.
You don't know what version of OpenSSL
Well, and it does sound like this was an appliance.
Yes, this was an appliance.
Yeah.
And this probably happened immediately, right? They might not have had time to patch it.
Yeah.
By the time they got the announcement, and then in this case, they would have to wait for a patch from
a hardware vendor.
The appliance vendor.
Yeah, which that could, who knows how long, if the device is even supported. And by the way, are you in a support contract? Because if you're not, you're going to need to pay up all of your missed time that you were supposed to be in a support contract before we'll give you patches. Have you ever been through that runaround?
Never been in that runaround.
So this happens all the time with these hardware devices. Is they'll have yearly support contracts, and if you miss a year, you back pay. And so not only do you have to pay for the year you want support, but you have to pay for the year you miss support. So in some cases, this is thousands of dollars before you'll get updates to stuff like this. That's a massive problem. And it's that kind of crap that's going to keep Heartbleed around. And it's that kind of crap that makes me not recommend those devices to, well, used to. I'm not in the position anymore, but I used to, always try to push people away from those types of devices. And one of them was checkpoint firewalls. Like firewalls. It's disgraceful.
Yep.
All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
No, but there's lots more Heartbleed stuff coming up, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned for the roundup. after the feedback. All right, well then I will thank our friends at Ting. Go over to TechSNAP.ting.com. Why would you do that? I'll tell you why you would do that, because I told you to. No, actually, because
they saved the show. Yeah. We're actually recording this episode directly after 159, and for all the time 159 should have been live, there was no internet here because Comcast outage.
Starting at 1 a.m. in our area, Comcast went out and didn't come back up until, what, 4 o'clock?
Yeah, something like that. So like I woke up in the morning to do show notes and had no internet.
Yeah. And so we were like, well, what are we going to do? Well, you know what we did? We took Rekai's HTC One, we turned on hotspot tethering, and we got our laptops on the Wi-Fi. We got the show put together.
Writing show notes like crazy.
And you know, the thing that legitimately is great about that is Ting's model is you just pay for what you use. And so I don't have to worry about all of a sudden getting this massive overage because
or having
the last few weeks I've been using a lot of data.
Or having to call your phone provider and enable tethering.
Yes.
Because it's a separate feature that costs extra.
No, I just tap the option in the operating system and I use the device like it was meant to be used by the creators of Android, aka Google. Now, here's some other great things about Ting. So outside of the $6 flat rate and then just your usage on top of that, they have 24/7 customer service where a real person, I'm sorry, not 24/7, it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but here's the part that's great. An actual person answers the phone. I will take not having 24/7 over having them actually staff people in their office that answer the phone. I will take that any day.
And not only they're not just people, they're people that actually care about, people that like cell phones and know about, you know, the latest models and everything, and
people that can actually solve the problem. Like they're empowered to actually solve the problem.
Like, oh, well, I have to ask my manager if I can. It's like, no, I will just make this right for you.
Right. Yeah. That. Thank goodness too, because I'll be honest. Like that whole process. Like if I get to the point where I'm calling in, I'm probably not in a great mood. I mean, I'm not going to be mean, but like I want somebody who can solve.
There's a nice Canadian on the other
Well, yeah, that's true. But really, you know, I've been using Ting for over a year. I've set up multiple devices. I've handed devices down to other folks. I've never had to call because Ting has an awesome dashboard. Yes. And if you're like me, you'll appreciate
every company that has an awesome web thing, so I don't have to phone them.
Right. Give me the tools to let me do it myself, let me manage it, and make it very clear, right?
It'll be faster, and I'll be happier.
Yes, and like you can use your customer service reps to take care of other folks who don't want to use the web interface. And the great thing is it's not just like your usage. You can set up call forwarding rules, voicemail. You can set up like nicknames on your bill that will show up, so it's really simple. You can set up all kinds of sorts of alerts for different aspects of your Ting account. It's really a powerful solution. I've activated, deactivated several devices. I really love it, and I think you should check it out. So here's what you need to do. Go to TechSNAP.ting.com. That'll take $25 off your first device. If you've already got a device, well, then they're going to take $25 off your first month. And if you're like me, that's probably going to get you in for free. My first month was paid for, and then a little bit more. They got lots of devices over at Ting from a whole range of prices, from feature phones to the latest Galaxy S5. You can get the iPhone 4S for 190 bones unlocked. It's yours. You own it. You're not in a contract. You're not going to be paying into that over 2 years. $190 for an iPhone 4S or $250 for an iPhone 5 on the Ting network, and you're done. Get a Nexus 5 directly from Ting for $324 or go buy it from the Play Store. And then you're really cooking with gas. The thing I love about that is the whole Ting model is set up so that they actually do better when you're happy, and they'll save you money because they're an MVNO, and that means they get to focus not on like where we're going to put our next tower, but they get to focus on the customer service, on the great devices, on the awesome web interface, and really shaking up the industry. And you'll see some other big companies out there trying to copy Ting, but they're just an imposter. They're just copying.
Well, yeah, it's the biggest change here is that Ting is just wanting to get more customers and
make mobile better.
Whereas the regular phone company is all about trying to lock you in this long-term contract where you don't actually own your phone so that you can't leave.
And they can just get you for everything.
Exactly. And Ting's more like, how about we do it how we do everything else on the internet?
That's why hotspot, tethering, picture messaging is all included, and you just pay for your usage.
And it's like, I know we normally make fun of the word cloud, but it's that kind of a model for phones. It's like you're paying for what you use, not some package that
you don't
never fits right.
You're like, the thing is, like, before I moved to Ting, my cell phone bill was like $125 a month, And I was probably getting $25, $30, $40 of value out of that.
Yep.
And every single month, I'm throwing money away. And Ting has a savings calculator. You can plug your bill into their savings calculator and see how much you would save. And trust me, that'll wake you up a little bit. You'll see that it's really a good way to go. And plus, here's the other thing. Ting loves the idea of just being a mobile ISP. So, like, they don't have all these, like, aspirations of controlling the entire consumer experience from App Store to the ROM on your phone.
Yep.
They just want you to use the service as you want to use it. And if you just want them as a mobile ISP, Bob's your uncle. Ting will hook you up. So go to techsnap.ting.com. And a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Alan. Do we have anything else to cover in the news segment?
Nope.
Well, then you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting site, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, our first email this week comes in from Jared. He's got 2 questions for us.
Okay.
He says, hey guys, question number 1. I work at a grocery store and I saw a technician working on a self-serve lottery machine. And I noticed, you ready for this, Alan? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it runs Windows XP, right? No. It runs Windows 8. So I asked him why they still use an OS that lost support so long ago. He said, in quote, "It doesn't matter since we use dial-up and we can block every other phone number except the one that belongs to our servers downtown." So here's my question. Is this safer than using a VPN? What are the pros and cons of dial-ups versus cable? And that's his first question. Then we'll get to the second question. So what do you think, Alan?
It depends. Most point-of-sale systems used to use dial-up, but just because that's what was available.
Yeah.
And almost all used, even just low-rate DSL lines.
Right.
Or cable or whatever, and they use SSL to verify stuff. But I suppose there's some advantage to using dial-up, just in that,
Yeah, I mean, how do you get
it's
around?
It's harder to do a man-in-the-middle attack on the phone system.
Like the chat room's bringing up right now. Helios says in the chat room, is like, how do you get around caller ID spoofing? Like, if you knew the number, right? If you could figure out the number.
Yeah, if you knew the number, then you could call in, and it seems pretty simple to be able to trick the device, the lottery machine, to call not the headquarters, but you, just so you can see what the packets are supposed to look like. And if you trick it to call you and then you call the other, it's easier to do a man in the middle.
We used to have to give the FDIC auditors all of our phone numbers, and then they would do a call scanner of the whole block, even ones we didn't provide them, and see if any modems picked up. And so attackers could do the same thing.
Yep.
98 seems like a bad idea. I mean, yeah, it's not connected to the internet. But
oh, you said 98. I could have swore you said Windows 8, and then I was very confused.
No. Windows 98.
Okay, yes.
Isn't that crazy?
That's really crazy. It's like just Windows 98 isn't stable. Like it doesn't.
I know.
It doesn't like to run for a long time.
Like you're winning the lottery and then it crashes on you. All right, question number 2 from Jared comes in. He says, I'm listening to TechSNAP from episode 1, and I'm on 97 as I'm typing this. Anyways, I keep hearing you say that you should run ZFS without a RAID card. However, I own a 3-ware 9758i, he links us to it, with 5 3-terabyte Western Digital RAID drives in RAID 5. I will upgrade to 8 drives in the future. And I'm about to create a file system. However, I'm starting to reconsider whether or not I should use the RAID card at all. The motherboard only has 6 SATA 3 ports and 2 SATA 2 ports on board itself. The RAID card has 8 ports. What I'm doing with this RAID is hosting a full backup of my Blu-rays, my home movie collection, and serving out Plex to my Raspberry Pis throughout my house. So what is a must for me is to have throughput of at least about 35 megabits, so most of the space will be taken up with 20 to 35 gigabyte of backed up Blu-rays. He's using Samba for some stuff as well.
So for that, most times 3-ware will have multiple firmware images available, one of which will be IT mode, which basically will take off the RAID functionality on the card and basically turn the card just into a host bus adapter, a disk controller.
So if you're using, you're saying still, if you're using ZFS, just don't use the RAID
specifically,
card.
Don't pass ZFS one drive that's actually a RAID 5 of all your other drives, because that breaks the whole point of ZFS.
Okay.
But one of the reasons not to use a RAID card for ZFS is the RAID card tries to deal with, when a drive throws an error, it likes to not pass that to the operating system and try to resolve it itself. And then ZFS is finding out that there was an error.
Right. Right.
So
yeah,
in your list of priorities, like what you want, if you can use the RAID card, but try to just pass the drives through and don't create any arrays. So best option is there's an initiator mode firmware for your RAID controller that just disables the RAID functionality and the retries and all that stuff. Okay. That's the best solution. Second best is using the RAID controller and not creating volumes, right? Just have it pass the disk through in JBOD mode or whatever.
Would you prefer he uses the motherboard? Even though it might be slower speed? SATA
depends on the motherboard. But yeah, SATA 2, which is 3 gigabytes per second, is still going to give him his throughput he needs.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Most spinning hard drives can't max out the SATA 2 anyway, let alone SATA 3.
He wants to use ZFS.
Yeah, so he's already winning there.
Yeah.
So in general, it depends. Sometimes you might even get better speed by putting half the drives on the 3-ware and half the drives on the motherboard.
Oh, I like
just
this.
Because you've got 2 separate controllers there so that, neither one's getting saturated.
Yeah, I like that.
Especially if the 3-ware controller is on like a PCI Express slot or something, or a PCI slot, there's only so much bandwidth there.
Yes.
So you might actually see some advantage from spreading the drives across your motherboard controller and your other one. On the system I bought, it has like a 6-port Intel controller and then 2 separate 2-port Marvel controllers and then an eSATA controller or something. And I originally had them spread out, but I found that the Marvel was significantly slower than the Intel, so I moved all the drives to the Intel. So your best bet might actually be to benchmark and see, put a couple of drives on each and see how they compare and then maybe decide what to do.
That's a great idea.
But yeah, the main reasons to avoid the RAID are, if you pass a RAID 5 array to ZFS, then it has no redundancy to solve problems with, right? RAID 5 can protect data loss, but it doesn't protect when data gets corrupted, whereas ZFS does. So yeah, you want to avoid using RAID on the controller at all. And then if you can get IT mode or just a plain HBA instead of a RAID controller, the main difference there is when you're buying hardware, an HBA is much cheaper because it doesn't have all the RAID software or the license for the firmware or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But also it usually means that it doesn't try to suppress errors and save you from them when you want ZFS to be informed when there's an error.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Almost sounds counterintuitive at first, but it does make sense.
Yeah.
Viewer Chris writes in. He says, "Hi, hosts. Various website tests, like he links to sslabs.com/SSL test, allow you to test the strength of sites' SSL certificates, and it issues a grade based on the certificate."
Mostly you're testing the SSL server, not the certificate, although the certificate is one component of the grade.
Okay. So his question is why not all sites achieve a grade A or better? So he links to a couple examples, Schneier.com, ScaleEngine.com, TarSnap.com, Mail.yahoo.com. He says, as an example of site, let's go with Schneier.com, a blog site. Granted, he is a security crypto dude, but why would his site have a higher score over Microsoft? Microsoft got an F. ScaleEngine.com and TarSnap.com got a B. Is the reason for backwards compatibility or of older browsers and OS, as well as making sites load faster?
Part of it was ScaleEngine and TarSnap used to get an A until the SSL Lab guys changed one of the requirements just the other day and dropped everybody's grade to a B.
That's some bad timing, Alan.
Well, they made a requirement to support the newest TLS, which requires having the version of OpenSSL that happened to be vulnerable to Heartbleed. All of ScaleEngine servers are using an older version of OpenSSL that wasn't ever vulnerable to Heartbleed. And now that drops your rating to B.
It's just because your version number isn't what they want.
Well, because we don't have support for the newer TLS that provides better perfect forward security or whatever.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things that go into the rating, and you'll notice that while we got a B, we have no big negatives on our list at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And part of it is I don't think I've gone through and reorganized the order of a couple of the encryption types to make sure that if you're using Internet Explorer that you get perfect forward security or something. It's something minor like that. Microsoft gets an F because they're probably doing something weird.
So would you maybe take pause if a site that you use for something important got an F? that seem like a bad sign?
Possibly. So you have TarSNAP up right now, and you can see the reason their grade is capped at a B is because they don't have support for TLS 1.2.
Right. Yep.
And that was
right there, capped to B.
Yeah, that was specifically, they decided that TarSNAP did that they're going to use the stable version of OpenSSL instead of the developmental one, and they're getting penalized for that.
So you got to figure what makes the grade.
Yeah.
Okay.
The important thing with TarSNAP is that the actual encryption that's used for transferring your data is not using SSL. Colin basically was afraid of OpenSSL and all this Heartbleed shit.
I wonder why.
He uses S-Tunnel, the program he wrote that's using the same basic cryptographic primitives, but stripping out all the compatibility crap and just does the encryption, and that's it.
Yeah. Funny how that works a little better for him, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Next email comes in, and by the way, thanks, Chris, for sending that in. That was a good question. Mataiki writes in. I'm sorry, I get it wrong every time. He says, TarSNAP, speaking of which,
yep,
it's almost like I planned that. How does TarSNAP's deep dupe works? TarSNAP says that they can with dedupe, they can shrink, say, 17.7 terabytes to just 13.8 gigabytes, and he includes the link in their fact that talks about that. But I wonder, how can that work so well when everything is encrypted on the client side? Alan, how does that work? If you're encrypted on the client side,
because they do the dedupe before they encrypt it.
Is that it?
Yeah.
So he was thinking it's like a server-side dedupe?
Specifically, Colin gave a talk about how the dedupe in TarSNAP works, and there are slides.
Okay.
But I can't find them.
Yes.
He gave the talk at EuroBSDCon 2013 in Malta.
Did you catch that?
Yes, I was in the room and saw it. It was a very great talk. And I'm not sure where he put the slides.
So it's just as simple as it's your own personal dedupe, and he's not doing server-side deduping where he's pooling everybody.
I'm not sure about some of that as well.
Okay.
But the slides explain his diff algorithm that he wrote and like ridiculous math. I'm sure we pulled it up when someone asked about it.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. I remember you talking about the talk before.
Yeah.
Well, I can dig around for it too and put it in the show notes. But client side dedupe. I mean, when Matai wrote this question, I was thinking something like, part
of it is
Dropbox
they're using block level dedupe on the server, right? So there's only so many blocks, and once enough is stored, then they already have most of the blocks.
Right. Huh. Well, that's interesting. I got to look more into TarSNAP. It seems like it's a really great solution.
Yep.
All right, so
I'm sure we'll talk more about it soon.
Yes, I think we will, as a matter of fact. Okay, ready for our next question? Alan, here it comes. It's from Gleb. He says, Dear Chris and Alan. Ooh, so formal. I like this. A few days ago, I posted a question on the TechSNAP subreddit, but I didn't get a reaction, so I figured it must have gotten a spam. Oh, it might have. So he wanted us to address it on the show. He says, anyways, I enjoy the show and all the other shows from Jupiter Broadcasting as well. Regards, Gleb. So I'll pull it up here. The subreddit is links.techsnap.tv, and sometimes there's certain questions that are maybe even better directed there. But here was one that he wasn't sure if it got caught by the spam filter. What a bummer. I will fix that right now. Okay. So he wants to know how to protect Apache from HTTP DDoS, or how to protect Apache from DDoS attacks.
Well, which kind of DDoS attack?
Well, let's see if he asks. He says, I work on a project that uses Apache version 2.2 on CentOS 6 as a web server. A few days ago, the site was DDoSed. He says, yes, the 1D, because according to the logs, traffic came from one IP address, and Apache just couldn't handle it. Though the attack itself was rather simple, sending rubbish to port 80 instead of actual HTTP requests, the attack stopped after I blocked the attacker's IP with IP tables. Mm-hmm. We thought about how to mitigate DDoS attacks before, but all we got to was mod evasive module and IP tables rules that blocks IP addresses. Since Apache proxies requested the application caches responses in the file system, my first thought was to use Nginx that would serve static files and proxy requests to Apache in case the file is not cached. But I think I should learn how to cook Apache properly before attempting to use Nginx. It's not a silver bullet anyway. Other steps I came up with are apply more strict IP tables rules and use something like fail to ban to block clients that are causing too many errors. In the case it's needed, server gets around 31,000 requests per day for all virtual hosts on the server. And I understand the topic is huge and complex, but if there's any tips or configuration for Apache to mitigate DDoS attacks, he would appreciate it.
Well, yeah, specifically, as soon as he said that, I was thinking mod evasive, because you can say one particular IP address is not allowed to make more than so many requests a second.
Right.
And that should have dealt with most of what he was running into. One of the things that can, the easiest way to take out an Apache is to hit its max workers, right? It can only handle so many connections at once. Because the way typically Apache works is with the prefork NPM means that it has a binary running for each user that's connected. And you can only run so many before you run out of RAM or whatever. And that's where Nginx makes a big difference, because Nginx will have a fixed number of workers, like usually around the number of CPUs you have, or maybe twice that. So like 8 workers. And then they're event driven. So every time an event happens, they do the work. And so there's advantages and disadvantages. But, if you put an Nginx in front of the Apache, then when the Apache has to do the work, right, the connection comes in, Apache does the work, it comes up with the answer, and then it sends it back to the user. Well, if the user is slow, then that worker is busy until all that data is sent.
Yes.
And specifically, there's an attack for attacking Apache called slow loris, where the whole idea is that you request a big file and then read it 1 byte every 2 minutes. Just quick enough to not time out.
It's brutal.
Right? And then you just do that until you've hogged up every worker that's available, and then nobody can get to the website. With Nginx, in front of Apache, what would happen there is the worker would send all the data to Nginx, which would then sit on it and meter it out to the user as fast as they wanted, or as fast as they can take it. And because Nginx is event-driven, it doesn't run into the problem of not having enough workers, because it has a fixed number of workers, and each worker just does the chunk of work. Because Nginx doesn't have to worry about, the fact that in Apache, if you're using PHP, the PHP is built into the Apache child, usually. But he mentions he has a backend app that Apache is proxying to.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, and it
in that case, he may be able to actually just do away with Apache altogether and have Nginx do the proxy.
And see, that's what I was going to suggest. And it sounded like he started going down that logical track and then thought, well, no, I don't want to use Nginx to solve a problem that I should be able to fix in Apache. But it sounds like you're saying, no, Nginx is the solution.
In particular, Nginx just doesn't have that particular problem. Right? One of the problems Nginx was designed to solve was, what do you do when you have 10,000 people that want to connect to your website at once? Apache really can't handle that. It can handle 10,000 requests a second as long as there's no more than a couple hundred requests at once, right? You spread them out over the second.
Yeah.
Whereas Nginx can handle all those at once.
I see. There you go. So it's not. So he's looking at it as I'm not setting up Apache correctly. And you're like, well, maybe there's a few things. But
mod evasive is good. I think there's actually.
What about failed to ban? What do you think about using failed to ban?
Well, you'd have to log when there was a failed attempt, or you'd have to have some pattern that failed to ban would detect and then ban the IP.
Yeah.
Which is basically what DOS evasive is trying to do. It has a hash table in Apache and it says, hey, this guy's made too many requests in the last so many seconds.
Right. Yeah, you're already getting that with mod evasive. Yeah.
So I'm a little surprised that mod evasive didn't stop that attack. I'm not sure if he added that after or if he had that during.
Well, I will put a link to this in the show notes. So if anybody else has some suggestions and ideas there too, they can throw that in there, because it got caught by our spam filter in the subreddit, and so he didn't get an answer. I feel bad about that. I hate it when that happens. Reddit.
Yep.
Hey, Reddit, get it together. He submitted it 8 days ago. Jeez.
And so, there's a couple different things you can do, but it depends on the type of DDoS. If they're just attacking the whole server and taking it offline with a flood of traffic, then there's not much you can do about that.
Yeah, they're just sending a bunch of traffic to 80.
Yeah, well, in this case, if it sounded like if it was just one guy and they weren't overwhelming the connection, they were just overwhelming Apache.
Right.
Yeah. And so, there's probably some tuning you can do there. Check on the max clients. And in general, you can, I don't know if you can do it with any of the Linux firewalls, but with FreeBSD, you can use dynamic rules to actually set limits. So saying each IP address is only allowed to connect to me 10 times or 5 times or something like that. And you're not allowed to have more than that many concurrent connections.
Rate limiting? That's nice.
Well, not so much a rate limiting, but a limit to the number of concurrent connections that each individual IP can have.
What would be the difference between that and rate limiting?
Well, rate limiting is saying you can only make so many requests a second.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one is saying you can only ever have 10 connections open at once.
From that one source.
Yeah. Or you could say you can only have so many from a wider range. Like each /24, each block of 255 IP addresses can only have 25 connections
That would
total.
be nice if you're getting...
So that if it's a botnet type thing, you can have a little more mitigation there.
Yeah, so that's good to know.
Yeah, if you're getting attacked by a list of sequential IPs, if each one is limited to 10, then they can still make 2,500 connections. But if each big block is limited to 25, then it's not so bad. But then, you have to look at your traffic patterns and see if that is actually going to work and how to handle it gracefully and so on.
Yeah,
but
you don't want to...
you don't want to turn away legitimate traffic.
Yeah, that can happen. So you got to be careful. Well, there you go, Gleb. Hopefully that helps. And if you have any suggestions for him, we have a link to the subreddit thread, and you can just go in there and toss it in there, and maybe we can help solve this problem for him. And we like to do that for the TechSNAP audience.
Yep.
Now, we like to get your questions. So please go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and click the contact link and choose TechSNAP from the drop-down. Send in your sysadmin, your hardware, your networking, your security, your war stories. I know if you're in IT, you've got a few of those. Whatever it is, send them in at TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or the contact link, or even better, subreddit links.techsnap.tv, assuming you don't get sent to spam. All right, Alan. Well, with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the roundup are stories that just didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to go over them with you and maybe give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And a lot of these links come from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, brace yourselves, because this one was the top story in our subreddit this week. North America is down to its last IPv4 addresses. Are you freaking out yet?
No.
Oh. So in summary, this is it, Alan. They're almost all out. They're down to just the last few addresses, so you better jump on IPv6 right now.
Yeah.
You sound like you're doubting.
The authority just got assigned its last block to start dividing up.
Yeah, that's what that means.
And the block is very large. A /8 is, I don't know, 16.7 million times 16.7
16.7 million IP addresses in North America. So the media just loves running these stories, don't they? They just love this story.
It's important that we start moving towards V6, but yeah. It's like, as an indicator, the fact that we're not out, I got 32 separate /29s assigned to me this week.
I guess we do still have a few to go around.
Each server needed, 5 IP addresses.
Well, there you go. All right. But if you're worried, there you go. We tracked it, and the subreddit was.
Yep. And yes, it's important that we start moving. But
it's like IT's climate change in a way. It's like we see this trend, we see the signs, and everybody's talking about it.
Yep.
Okay, so we said we were going to talk more about Heartbleed in the roundup. Here's one of them. Heartbleed has been used to steal the private keys from OpenVPN.
A Swedish VPN provider that was using OpenVPN called Molvad. This allowed them by, instead of hitting the web server, they just kept hitting OpenVPN until they stole the SSL key. And depending on your OpenVPN setup, if you have the private key, you could then create a new certificate and sign it, which would allow you to connect as a user. Or to create a certificate with the common name or serial number of somebody else and impersonate someone using SSL. Or if you're in the man-in-the-middle type situation, say you're a government, and you stole the private key of the Swedish VPN provider.
That would never happen.
Then you could create your own OpenVPN instance using the private key that you stole and intercept the connections of users and make users who are using a VPN to avoid being spied on by the government, and you would get their decrypted traffic.
Wow. Yeah. Good point.
They would just basically, you could trick them into directly sending you their traffic.
So, you can't really use some of these Heartbleed testing tools to point them at your favorite VPN provider because you could test their web server.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily test the VPN part.
Yeah. Oh. Can you think of a way to test a VPN server? Unless they have a web server on it, I guess if they have there's just no way you would know if they know. It's
basically if you're the VPN provider, you should know what version of OpenSSL you're using, and you should have fixed it.
Yeah. Okay, Alan. Well, another Heartbleed story in the roundup. CERT is warned of Heartbleed vulnerabilities in some Siemens gear.
Yeah, specifically, this is SCADA or industrial control systems. So all these systems designed to run power plants and factories and all that kind of stuff.
The ones that don't get changed out for decades, you mean?
Yeah. And they're using vulnerable versions of the SSL.
Oh, good.
I'm actually surprised that they were using OpenSSL 1.01 as opposed to 0.9.
Something older, yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
But, yeah, they're vulnerable, and a bunch of them don't have fixes out yet.
Not too surprising. We've sort of been speculating.
Hopefully all that stuff's not aimed at the internet, but you never know.
Some of it seems to be for some odd reason. Yet again, another reason.
It's like I might want to turn the air conditioning on at the factory from my house, and I'm the boss.
I mean,
so we're doing this.
Look at the Target situation, right? Their HVAC system wasn't directly connected to the internet, but because they had a third party managing it who came in to just adjust the temperature at Target stores, that's what led to the Target
monitor what the
breach.
temperature was, not even necessarily make a change.
Right, just to monitor and log it, just so that way they were like compliance with regulations or something like that. And that's what led to one of the largest credit card breaches ever.
Of all time.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, all right. Well, let's change gear to Heartbleed affecting healthcare sites.
Yeah. So, we talked a bit about the other week how the Canadian Revenue Agency, the tax agency in Canada, had shut down and because someone was actually using Heartbleed against them and got arrested for it. But there's no evidence that anybody used Heartbleed against healthcare.gov, but preventatively, they're resetting everyone's passwords.
Okay. Yes. I heard about this too, because they were using a vulnerable version of OpenSSL during...
Because, as is good practice, because there's even a remote possible chance someone could have used Heartbleed and got one person's password, and, this is your healthcare information, which is, generally medical records are one of the most sensitive bits of information.
Well, and look when the Obamacare sign-up happened, during the prime of this thing's vulnerability.
Exactly.
Right?
So they've reset everyone's passwords.
Good. Okay, I got one that's interesting. I don't know if this might jog some old memories, Alan. Oh, look at the New York Times cutting me off. Well, I'll tell you as much as I can before... I guess I've read the New York Times too much this month, but an informant working for the FBI who was an old anonymous member, it turns out was helping direct cyber attacks on other nations, including some in Iran, Syria, Brazil, and Pakistan, according to documents and interviews with people involved with the actual attacks. They were exploiting vulnerabilities in popular web hosting software. It's cut off, but it was Plesk. They were taking advantage of a Plesk vulnerability, and then from there...
I remember we covered the Plesk vulnerability a while ago. Yeah.
And from there, they were able to get bank information and login information from some sites, the government servers. They were able to get into some countries' own servers. They uploaded to an FBI mirror, so the FBI got a copy of these documents, according to court documents that were released. The details of a 2012 episode have until now been kept largely in secret in closed session of a federal court in New York, and heavily redacted documents. The documents don't exactly indicate whether the FBI directly ordered the attacks, but I think his name was, it's cut off in the article here, but I think his name was Sabu. Do you remember the anonymous guy that they flipped? He was working with another guy from LulzSec. So this guy was from Anonymous. He was working for the FBI for a while because they got his kid and stuff like that. They flipped him, and then he got his buddy in LulzSec to do these attacks in Syria and Iran. Essentially, they're speculating for proxy for the FBI. So the FBI didn't exactly do it. He did it.
I guess my question here was, did the FBI direct him to keep things going so that and copy all the data so they could catch the other members of Anonymous? Or were they doing it because the FBI wanted to attack the Brazilian government?
Yeah, I definitely think it's the second. And the reason why I think it's the second is this happened after the Stratford breach. And after this, they say in this article, which I'll have linked in the show notes, after the Stratford breach, it was go for it, whatever you want. Let's just go crazy. Let's get as much as we can. And they were using Anonymous and LulzSec to do this. And then in the meantime, the headlines are LulzSec attacks this, Anonymous does this. We've got to crack down on them. But behind the scenes, the FBI is pushing these guys to do it.
Yep.
And now this has come out in court documents in New York. This is not even conspiracy or speculation. It's literally stated in the court documents.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll have the whole article in the show notes. Unfortunately, I can't pull it all up right now because New York Times has a stupid paywall. Speaking of the New York Times, this is probably why I hit the paywall. Here's another story. Heartbleed highlights a contradiction in the web. Alan, this was your pick. Tell me about this one.
So this one kind of is just the New York Times digging more into this whole, is open source actually safer? And, the covariant report has told us that, yes, it is. But at the same time, because it's open source means anybody can audit it, it doesn't mean anybody does.
Yeah, that's why they have a picture of Eric S. Raymond here, because that was the point he was making.
Yeah,
with his kitty in his lap. Look at that.
Yeah, well, because he's the guy that came up with the original quote that with enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. But just because people can look at it doesn't mean that they do.
Right.
And I think this is where things like bug bounties are starting to come up a bigger thing. Right. I remember at a previous BSD Colin Percival gave a talk about bug bounties, and he has one with a scale for TarSNAP, where if you find a typo, he'll give you $1. But just because you might get that people will look at it, right?
Yeah.
And so even people that don't know are looking at and finding even stuff that.
And so if it's something more critical, the price
goes way up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
But yeah, and it's just seeing more of that kind of thing and actually get people to audit the stuff.
Yeah. It's a good time.
Right now, the only people that generally do that are the OpenBSD guys, right?
It's definitely a good time for everybody thinking about that.
Yep.
I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. 40 gigabits. That's right, the new Thunderbolt. This is all from rumors, from leaked slides from Intel, and we're not going to get our hands on it anytime soon. It's going to be part of Alpine Ridge, which will feature a new design capable of handling transfer rates up to 40 gigabits per second, double that of the current Falcon Ridge Thunderbolt controller. Users will be able to pipe data through DisplayPort 1.2, USB 3.0, HDMI 2.0 will all be supported in one Thunderbolt connection, so that you can have devices on the other end that look like a USB hub that are connected to Thunderbolt. On the power side, consumption has been decreased by 50%. However, they are now allowing for up to 100 watts of charging to go through the cable. So you can bus power something that requires 100 watts to run, which is nuts. The next generation plug is said to be about 3 millimeters thick, and it facilitates increased bandwidth, but they will make adapters available for backwards compatibility. Assuming this leak slide is correct, Alpine Ridge will see a release in 2015 alongside a new CPU dubbed Skylake. Ooh, that sounds pretty cool.
But yeah, the compatibility with USB 3 and stuff seems interesting.
That and HDMI too. All right, Alan, we got another Heartbleed story in the roundup, don't we?
It's talking about the value of and the problems with certificate revocation lists and the online certificate status protocol. Specifically, when OCSP came out, and it basically provides the way for your browser to check whether the certificate you were just sent has been revoked yet or not, right? And then the old way was certificate revocation lists, where in the certificate it would have a URL, and you go and check and see if the certificate was valid, right? Or rather, not in the actual certificate, in the certificate of the authority.
Okay.
So like when you get presented the certificate by PayPal and it was signed by, say, Global Trust or GeoTrust or whatever, in the GeoTrust certificate, it would have a URL. You go there, download a list of all the certificates that have been revoked, and check. And, as we were looking at before, the
pre-show, right?
Yeah, the list was normally like 45 kilobytes.
Yeah.
And now it's 5 megabytes.
Yeah.
Because everybody had to roll their certificates for the Heartbleed thing.
Yep.
And so that's using more bandwidth and stuff. But at the same time, most of the browsers and stuff, because OCSP wasn't that well supported and, the certificate authorities would have downtime or something, your browser checks whether it's been revoked or not. But if it can't connect to the OCSP, it just allows you to connect anyway.
Yeah.
Right? To avoid throwing errors all the time just because the CA's thing was down.
Yeah. They're overloaded.
Yeah. But at the same, or so that someone can't do a denial of service attack on, the provider that provides the one for Google and stop your browser from letting you go to Google. The problem with that is that if you're, say, a government trying to do a man-in-the-middle attack on someone and you have one of these certificates been revoked, if you can just block me from being able to reach the OCSP server, my browser will just accept your revoked certificate.
You could do that with a little DNS trickery.
Yeah.
So that's not too tough.
Or just rather man-in-the-middle and just block the IP or all kinds of things like that. And so this article goes into what some of the drawbacks are, and it talks a bit about Google's approach with the CRL set, where they basically include in their Chrome updates all the time what the valid certificate is for a bunch of really important websites.
Yeah, they bake it in. Yeah.
So they bake in the ones for all the Google stuff so that you don't have to deal with the whole trust chain.
Yeah. All right. Well, can I tell you about something my body is ready for? If this is real, if this is legit, and if it's going to be standards compliant, I am so excited about Google supposedly working on end-to-end encryption for Gmail. And you're like, what does that mean? Well, engineers at Google are working on ways to make PGP easier for users. This is according to a report in VentureBeat, as part of a larger push for stronger user security in the wake of the NSA revelations. It is still unclear exactly what form the measures will take. The details of implementation will make a huge difference, of course. Yep. The biggest concern is whether users will be able to hold their own keys or whether the keys will be kept on Google's network where they could be vulnerable.
Taken by the NSA.
Yeah.
Even if Google was trying to resist, it's possible they could get it anyway.
I could see we'll store your key in Google Drive. But let's say that it's going to be straight up legit PGP. and you have, let's say it's an option to store it locally or to store it on Google servers, I think this could be huge. If they could make PGP accessible to average people that could take advantage of good encryption or pretty good privacy and have it in one of the most popular webmail clients, and then if I could compose in Gmail and have it PGP encrypted, and then Alan could open it up in Thunderbird and still be able to read it, that's a huge win. And that would be a real, true sign that Google is not in bed and not complicit with all of this monitoring. If they really did something like this to make the NSA's job harder, I would be so happy. I'd be one of the loudest advocates.
Yeah, one of the browser plugins I used was specifically designed to allow you to use GPG in Gmail, but Gmail kept changing so much it made it hard. And there were other problems with doing it as a browser plugin where you could still manage to steal the plain text.
But I agree with Josh in the chat room. If they put the keys on Google's server, it's pretty much as close to pointless as it can be. I mean, I realize they're not going to hand over everybody's keys, but it's not. That's no good.
Well, then you have something like keybase.io.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
And when they host your key, it's encrypted on the client side with a password. So they have your key, but it's encrypted, and they're not supposed to know the password. It's like, well, that's maybe
sort of LastPass style there of storage in a sense.
So they have your private key, but they don't have the ability to use it without the password. But if you have to give them the password, then that's kind of one thing. So it kind of gets iffy.
It's all in the details.
Yeah, and basically, if it's not open source, so it can be audited, can we trust it?
All right, why don't we finish up our roundup with a little Easter hack, one more story, and this time Java related, right?
Yeah, so it's actually still about SSL, but it's some critical bugs in the way SSL was implemented in Java that Oracle fixed with their big patch update for April.
Oh, are these nasty ones?
Yeah, I think one of them is similar to the Apple one, where someone could inject a message into an encrypted connection.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Yep. Yeah. Interesting.
Some crazy stuff.
Well, look at Oracle, huh? Everybody's checking it. I hope. It seems like all eyes are on OpenSSL or all SSL related types of functionality. It doesn't have to just be OpenSSL. Well, very good. There you go. All of the links to everything we talked about today are in the show notes. Just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and click on TechSNAP 160, and then just about chronological order to everything we talked about right there. And while you're there, do me a solid. Click that contact link and send us in one of your questions, because you know what? We love your questions. We have a whole segment dedicated to your questions. Hardware, software, sysadmin, security, networking, storage. We want it, and we want to read it. And don't forget about that subreddit. You can help make this show better. Links.techsnap.tv. Submit stories. Help form and mold our future shows over at links.techsnap.tv. And one last, maybe most important way you can interact with us, you can join us live over at jblive.tv, 1 p.m. Pacific on Thursdays, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom! You can also find out more at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. Will automatically convert to your local time zone. And don't forget about jblive.info. We have an audio feed streaming 24/7, which is a great way to get caught up on the back catalog. And when we're live, we're rebroadcasting on there, and that's great for in the car, so you can listen through your phone, or maybe you're sitting at a desk somewhere where they don't want you to stream in video. jblive.info has got you covered. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.